And I think, do we have a responsibility to not only this generation, but to future generations to look at the causes and conditions that lead to something? And most Israelis I talk to, most Jewish people I talk to, most Palestinians I talk to, it's not working for them. They don't feel safe.
Yeah.
They would love to not spend billions of dollars on bombs and missiles and spend those billions of dollars building schools and childcare centers and hospitals and malls and like places for people to thrive. And I get the sense that like most people actually would love to live in a place where they could do that, right? Where the bombing would stop on both sides. And I don't know if it's a lack of leadership or if it's the pain of all these years just builds up. And so there's no way to turn that. It feels sometimes like there's no way to turn that around. And every Israeli that's killed, that family wants revenge. And every Palestinian that's killed, understandably, they too want revenge, right? And so there's a world where it's getting more and more like hot and fire. And what I worry about this situation is that it spreads and there's more hate crimes and there's more of this element of wanting revenge. And I get it. Like, I understand that feeling. And I'm also wondering, where does that end? And is there a way in which maybe these narratives that we've kept going for all these years, are they helpful, these identities and these narratives? Or in some ways, do we need to actually kind of expand our sense of who we think we are? That we're human beings. You know, I was reading recently that we're all part of they call her the mitochondrial Eve. She lived 155,000 years ago, and she's our DNA to every human being existing. Our mother.
Yeah.
And so on one level, we're all the same family. I mean, you can say you're Jewish, I'm not, whatever, but like on another level, if you look at the lens, you could say we're all Milky Way Galaxian, or you could say we're all human. We're all basically the same. And is that part of the answer? Or how do you look at and see like the role of identity and narrative when it's helpful, and also maybe when it's not helpful, and when those particular mindsets aren't helping us create peace and create a more loving world?
Well, so many things come up for me when as you pose that question, which is not only a question, it's also an eloquent statement of how it might be. You know, when is the issue of identity? What does it mean? It comes from Latin. Idem means the same, as an identical, and facere is to make. When we identify with something, we make ourselves the same as something.
Yeah.
If I identify with a certain group, and my identify is restricted to that, making the same as that group, then I'm going to experience everything largely through the majority experience or perspective of that group.
Yeah.
Look, I've just been through the former Yugoslavia, where, as I mentioned, the events and the perpetrations were horrible. But I was hosted by the Novak Djokovic Foundation. Djokovic himself is actually part Croat and part Serb. And although he identifies mostly as a Serb, but their foundation and his wife Jelena, they're just committed to peaceful child development, to make sure that parents treat their kids in such a way that they won't grow up full of hatred.
Wow.
And then we were in Sarajevo, where I had Muslim people come up to me, recognizing me, just thanking me for my work. And the same thing in Catholic Ljubljana in Slovenia. I'm telling you, Soren, you're so right. People just want to experience peace.
Yeah.
They just want to bring up their kids in a safe environment. They don't want to feel threatened. And this is true whether you're Jewish or Christian or Muslim, Buddhist, whoever you are, whether you're Israeli or Palestinian.
Yeah.
This is true for most people.
Yeah.
What complicates things are a number of factors. One of them is identification. And generally, once you identify with a group, a sense of victimization comes very easy.
Yeah.
Now, just in Hungary, where there's a monument near the parliament buildings, beautiful old parliament buildings, Hungary is a victim of Germany.
Wow.
The German eagles.
That's what the monument says? Or that's,
yeah. The German eagles swooping down on poor defenseless Hungary.
Wow.
That's not the history. The history was that Hungary, due to its leadership, was an ally of Germany.
Yeah.
Hungary had the first anti-Semitic laws in Europe way back in the 1920s, well before the Germans did.
Yeah.
The Hungarian state cooperated with the deportation of the Jews enthusiastically in 1944. Eichmann only had a couple of dozen SS men with him in Budapest. They couldn't have deported 500,000 Jews.
Yeah.
It took the Hungarian gendarmerie and the state apparatus to transport those Jews to Auschwitz.
Yeah.
And Hungary attacked Russia along with Germany. And 200,000 Hungarian young men died.
Wow.
Trying to subdue the Russians. Yeah. Then the Russians came back in and they occupied Hungary. Germany occupied Hungary only when Hungary tried to leave the German alliance. But the Hungarian government currently spreads this idea that we were the victims.
Right.
We had no role in this whatsoever.
Right.
And everywhere in the world it's like that.
Yeah.
When people identify, it's so much easier to see ourselves as victims, and which is not to say that no real victimization took place.
Sure. Right.
Hungary suffered terribly, for example, under the Russian occupation and the brutal communist dictatorship.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah.
At the same time, let's acknowledge that it wasn't Russia that attacked Hungary first, it was Hungary that attacked Russia first.
Yeah, I do that in my personal life. I'm like, this person's an asshole, and this person did this to me. And then if I actually am honest about myself, I generally had created conditions that supported that action. Like they're responsible for that action. Exactly. But I did things like passive aggressive statements, and then I like get mad at my partner for getting mad at me. But in general, if I'm really honest with myself, I'm feeding that fire in some ways. And I think that's really what you're talking about, right?
And that's the same in my marriage.
Yeah.
And so when you're asking what's the way out, self-examination is the first step, And the Krishnamurti, who is the spiritual teacher, he said that action is meaning only in relationship, he said. Action is meaning only in relationship.
Okay.
He said, without understanding relationship, action on any level will only breed conflict. The understanding of relationship is infinitely more important than the search for any plan of action, said Krishnamurti. And I've used that as the epigraph to two of my books. It's so true.
Yeah.
So if we want to understand something, let's begin. Let's at least begin with the willingness to look at our role and our own contribution to that relationship in which we're suffering.
Right.
Again, that doesn't justify
any action,
any particular action, but at least it provides a context. And it's not about making the wrong pass. Sapolsky, who I quoted, said something interesting. He said two things. He talks about the absurdity of hating any person for anything they have done. Given that in his view, we're so determined that everything we do is determined by the past, so then
it's like the sun, getting mad at the sun for rising and shining.
And he also says, there's no such thing as free will, and blame and punishment are without ethical justification. Now, I don't agree with him. I think it's possible to get to a position of free will, but I don't think most of us have it most of the time.
Yeah.
So in the interaction that you witnessed this morning between my wife and I, there were two people both lacking free will, acting on programming. To get to free will, it takes extraordinary effort to become conscious. So, conscious means you're aware of what's inside you. So there might be rage inside you, perfectly justified.
Yeah.
There might be hatred inside you, perfectly justified. There might be a desire for revenge inside you, perfectly justified. When I say justified, understandable.
Absolutely.
But they're not guides for action.
Yes.
The only guide for action is where we're in a non-defensive state.
Yeah.
When I say non-defensive, we might take a defensive stance,
Yeah.
but an emotionally non-defensive state where our prefrontal cortex, the midfrontal cortex, whose job it is to have insight, empathy, self-regulation, compassion,
Yeah.
when that's online, we might talk about free will. When we're regulated by our emotional reactions, collective or emotional, there's no free will.